Welcome to another episode of Relatively Damaged Live. My name is Angela, and this is Kat. I
Good
said
morning.
today. The live shows are currently streamed on Mondays to Twitch, YouTube, Facebook, and now Twitter. So remember to follow and subscribe and share with your friends. On the Monday segment of the show, Kat and I talk about topics that we simply find interesting. Our topic today: what does it mean to be a refugee? For those of you who normally watch the show, of course we have quotes. Come on. There's no other way. There's another way, but so the UNHCR says refugees are people who have fled war, violence, conflict, or persecution and have crossed an international border to find safety in another country. According to the 1951 Refugee Convention, a key legal document defines a refugee as someone who is unable or unwilling to return to their country of origin owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. And I think that the definition is actually quite much how do I want to say this? Much broader than that. There we go.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Kat.
That's what I was just going to say. I knew where you were going. That's exactly it. I mean, this is you said the UN? Mm-hmm. Was that definition from the UN?
And the UNHCR, which I can't remember what exactly that is, but Commission. I think there we go. The Human Rights Commission.
Yeah.
You're on it. I should have known.
Yeah. And that makes sense given that definition makes sense given the UN's focus.
Yeah.
And what they're about. And any discussion we have today, I want to make sure that it's clear we are not minimizing the suffering of refugees around the world, no matter what country they're coming from, especially with the violence in Ukraine right now and the invasion of Russia into that country. So I want to make sure, like I said, we don't minimize the pain and the suffering that those people are going on the most basic level, depriving them of food, shelter, and safety, physical safety.
Yeah.
But I think in so many ways, the basic definition, if you look at the dictionary, and I didn't actually get the dictionary definition, but a refugee is a seeker of refuge when you break down the etymology of the word. Mm-hmm. And so I think at times in our life, we can all be a refugee of some kind. I'm thinking of people in domestic violence situations. I'm thinking of people who disagree with their church and they're ostracized, sometimes to the point of not being safe. I'm thinking of many people in the African American community. You walk into the wrong place and their safety is at stake, and they must find refuge from those places.
And you could be living in another country and also feel not safe in that country because of the judgments and feel even more like a refugee in that country. I mean, more so, if that makes sense, because somebody could, like, for instance, someone could come over and they could be here and there are judgments. Like maybe there are people who are Russian right now, and for instance, in the States, maybe there's a tremendous amount of judgment or what have you, and they could feel like, oh shoot, I'm in trouble because there's all this judgment right now, and they're being damaged because of the judgment also. Because is it really their fault? And
right.
It's not. At least I don't think so.
Exactly. And the discourse that we use, according to that UN definition, So we're calling the people who are at our southern border migrants.
Mm.
And in reality, they're people seeking refuge. The violence in their country, the rampant crime, the force of either young girls being forced into prostitution to survive, or young boys being forced to join these basically criminal gangs who are running these Central American countries. They're just people who are trying to escape that. Um,
Yeah, it gets so convoluted sometimes, right? It's so
right.
easy to forget. I'm so glad you brought that up about the our southern border with Mexico, because it's really easy, I think, right now hearts are pouring out to the people in Ukraine, and there's like a bitterness towards people trying to escape from Mexico. And so how would one even reconcile that, Like, I hadn't even thought of that before. How could I have all this love for these people and then not for these people?
And well, I think it's just my opinion when we politicize these things, and obviously there is, political reasoning and thought behind that and propaganda. Um, but when you look at it at a one-on-one, who is this person? You know, I mean, I just remember seeing the children's faces at the border.
Mm.
I can't believe that these children, 3, 4, babies, 7 years old, are members of a criminal gang trying to infiltrate the United States. What parent would want to send their child away from them? They think that they can protect their children.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're in a position where they can't, to send them away on such a dangerous trek to try and get to some place where they have a chance.
Mm-hmm.
That to
I
me
mean,
is a refugee.
well, absolutely, I agree, and I'm just thinking of the courage it would take for a parent to release a child in that way, or to hope for better for a child in that way. I mean,
Yeah,
that the fear that would have to be felt in order to um for them to find that amount of courage would have to be tremendous, and I think it's really easy to forget that there isn't courage without fear.
right.
I mean, yeah, I know you've got a quote, so please.
I do, since you mentioned courage. So here is a quote. Unfortunately, it's not attributed, so I don't have that, but I think it's still good anyway. To be called a refugee is the opposite of an insult. It is a badge of strength, courage, and victory.
Mm, it
And
is strength, courage, and victory. Like, is it, read that again?
to be called a refugee is the opposite of an insult. It is a badge of strength, courage, and victory.
Mm, I totally agree, because I I think it takes so much courage to walk away, and I just think of the families that have been split up, like in Ukraine or Mexico or wherever, because I know
Mm-hmm.
there are more places than that. And in fact, I think I would go as far to say that people can be refugees in this, coming in the place, from the place where they live, in the place that they live, even in, like, let's say the city or the county that they live in, should there be domestic violence or abuse, uh,
Mm-hmm.
all of, I mean, there's so much there that we just, I think we get stuck on it. What, I mean, sometimes we're a refugee of our own heart. All that
Well,
fear
yeah.
comes in and we can't see straight.
Well, I also think like in the LGBT community,
Mm-hmm. Oh
there
yeah.
are so many people who, you know, get persecuted by their own families,
Mm-hmm.
and they come to, in a sense, uh, a ghetto
Yeah.
of people, less now so, but still to an extent, um, as when I was younger. You know,
Yeah.
you had those refuges where you could be yourself, you could
Mm-hmm.
express who you were, and without that judgment, without condemnation, you could just be freely who you were, but it
Yeah.
had to be within that situation.
Mm-hmm.
um,
Yeah. I'm just thinking of how much judgment can come from that. And I don't think, I'm gonna get a little spiritual.
I'm good with that.
I'm gonna talk about how the Savior asked Peter, "Lovest thou me?" And Peter answered, "Yeah, I love you." And he's like, "Well, feed my lambs or feed my sheep, right?" And asked a second and a third time. And the point wasn't that whether or not he loved Jesus, at least from my perspective, it was about whether he could love his fellow men and feed them. That I think that if I try to remember that people can be refugees from, and I think everyone has trauma, and I think that's what the perspective I'm coming from is that everyone can be a refugee. And if I judge them before I know them, then I'm just continuing to perpetuate the problem.
Right. um, it kind of goes into the other quote that I have, and it's a little bit of a long one.
Mm-hmm.
um, but I'll say the quote first, and then I'll elaborate on my thoughts on it. Okay, this is from Mohsin Hamid, and he says, "We are all refugees from our childhoods, and so we turn, among to other things, to stories. To write a story, to read a story, is to be a refugee from the state of refugees. Writers and readers seek a solution to the problem that time passes, and that those who have gone are gone, and those who will go, which is to say, every one of us, will go. For there was a moment when anything was possible, and there will be a moment when nothing is possible. But in between, we can create." And this quote just brings so much things to me, because when we're looking at what's going on in Ukraine, and we see the stories, the individual stories of the 11-year-old boy crossing by himself, uh, we see the Polish moms leaving their strollers for the Ukrainian mothers so that they have something for their small children.
Mm-hmm.
It's the stories that show uh, how the solution to the problem,
Mm-hmm.
which is to open our hearts
Mm-hmm.
and to love. When we're talking about within our own country, we're talking about the states of individual refuginess,
Mm-hmm.
i.e., the domestic violence, the women who, and it's usually women, who dedicate their lives to having battered shelters, to providing clothes and food and formula and diapers to women who
Mm-hmm.
have to leave those abusive situations, to the LGBTQ centers that are all over the country, that are places of refuge when someone comes out to their parents and their parents disown them and kick them out of the house
Mm.
just because they're gay. Those are the stories
Mm-hmm.
that resonate for me, um, that are told, and in a sense, that's where the victory lies. It's not a shameful state to be a refugee. It
Mm-mm.
is one of triumph.
Yeah, it takes so much courage to leave. I've pondered that too. What would I do? How would I behave if things like that happened here? And it would be really easy to say, oh yeah, I'd be courageous. And then I have to put myself in check and go, would I really? Or would I freeze? Neither of which is wrong, but neither of which is right either. Because I think also sometimes there's this judgment that can happen. Also, even as a refugee or someone who has left a country can be traumatized by just simply needing to make the choice. That can be traumatizing, I think.
Yeah. Well, I look at my familial history, and my father came over from Germany as a child. So he came over in the 50s, shortly after the war. Um, Now, was he a refugee in the UN sense? No. Um, but there was a poverty that was there, a lack of opportunity, um, which led the family to seek the opportunity here. Now, luckily, they had family, and that's what happens with a lot of people as they leave countries, either as a refugee or as an immigrant for less lesser reasons, mostly economic reasons or food scarcity reasons. Um, and they find community with others, other family or other members of their community. Um, and to keep, in a sense, the culture going, but also to have that sense of familiarity of language, of course, culture, of food.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and those people know what the other people have gone through.
Yeah.
And I think my other side of the family is Irish, so the Irish immigrants leaving because of the repeated famine,
Mm-hmm.
in the country, coming over to get a better opportunity. Now, were they forced to leave? Not in the sense of their homes were being bombed or anything like that, but the economic insecurity, the food insecurity made survival really the only option was to leave.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm just thinking about, like, as you're talking, even of gas prices here right now, at least where I am, we're at like $6 a
Oh,
gallon.
oh my God.
And I'm just thinking how some people it's going to be, do I eat or do I go to work? Do I, um, do I pay the electricity bill or do I eat? I'm just trying to think of all the
Right.
different choices that have to be made with gas being so much. And again, like, how do we, I think it's important to develop that loving heart,
Hmm.
you know but I also think, and we both participated in a meditation with I Am Heart this weekend. They've been doing weekly meditations for um, world peace, and to really send compassion and love over to the Ukraine and Russia, both, because both need it. And
Hmm.
one of the things that actually there were two questions, and I just thought that they were beautiful, is where's the war inside yourself, and how could healing that help the world? And the reason I bring that up is because I really do think inside of us, until we can address some of those pains and sufferings, I don't think we can even look to others with love, because then we're just looking with judgment. For
Right.
instance, um, I know someone who used to be homeless, and they actually got on their feet, got a job, all of that, and then went to college. And the one of the instructors at the college was surprised that they were still doing work for the homeless, that they wanted to help, that they were doing their best to give of themselves. And, I said, well, why were they surprised? That doesn't make sense to me. And she said, I asked the very same question. And it was because, well, most of the mentality, or many of them have the mentality, well, I got out, so you can too, forgetting all the people who had to help to get there, right? So then we started going down the, like, okay, well, who would have had to help? Well, they got a job. That employer helped. They got a place to live. Maybe there were county services involved. Like if there's a job, the people who go and buy things helped, right? Like, we don't really talk or think about how we all help and support each other. It's like somehow we get things and think we did it all by ourselves.
That is so true, and I don't want to go off on a tangent about that because
No.
I could, but
Right.
but that's really the truth. It kind of reminds me, and this is in relation to children, but the phrase "it takes a village."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It so takes a village.
But the truth of the matter is that we don't live on an island isolated by ourselves,
No.
where we are responsible for our own, 100% for making our own shelter, catching our own food, cooking our own food. We rely on other people.
Mm-hmm.
And the we just can't do it. And so when I see those people in need, and I see the helpers, reminds me of Mr. Rogers. Always look for the helpers.
Mm.
And so when those people are there and they're helping, or I'm there and I'm helping, I don't do it to get anything out of it. I do it to give. And I know those people, the helpers, are doing it to give.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there's a certain love, and to get spiritual, um, you know, Jesus said the two commandments, love God and love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
And
As
so,
yourself. I just want to reiterate that, as yourself, not just love the neighbor.
right,
Like, which actually, if you think about it, so I'm sorry, I know I cut you
no,
off.
go ahead.
Yeah. As it, that just reminds me of people who are angry and things like that. And I think, well, they absolutely can't love me. If that's how they are with me on the outside, imagine what they're like on the inside. I couldn't imagine the pain and the suffering.
And that's what, in a sense, love requires, is to, you can't fix other people, but you can walk with them.
Yeah, there's a. I'm gonna jokingly say I've got a refugee in my home right now. Someone who was injured and could not get home, and um, and I'm woken up in the middle of the night. There's a significant problem, and and it was in that moment. What choice do I make? Do I make the loving choice? And is that the loving choice? And mind you, I'm half asleep. But, I mean, even in Matthew 25, for I was hungered and you gave me meat. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you took me in, And how many times have I been the stranger that someone just took the risk to love? And is it a risk, right? Like, if Christ is in all of us, that love, if the light of Christ is in all of us, and the light of Christ is love, anyway, I've made this argument before, I think, but then I just had to, at that point, just really go into my heart and say, well, what's the loving thing to do right now? For everyone involved. And, we'll see what happens. Everybody's still asleep, but we'll see. I mean, if my job, is to love, and, I could have basically said, oh, well, here's some blankets. Like in this world or like, I think a lot in this world too, it's like, oh, I'll show up with brownies or food, here you go, and not really be that light and be that love. Like the refugees, on all levels, I think, yes, those things are fantastic and great. Those things are not love. Fighting for those basic needs. How are we also showing love? How are we also showing them that they matter, that they are important?
Yes. Yes, on so many levels. Um, going back and forth is, it reminded me of the other story that, as the Russian troops were going into the Ukraine, a lot of them didn't even know why they were going in there, and the Ukrainian forces knew what they were fighting for, and so they captured a young Russian soldier, and um, I believe he commented something like, "You look like me," and why are we fighting each other? And they gave him, he just broke down. He must have been young, probably 18, 19 years old. Gave him a phone so he could call his mother and tell his mother he was okay. That's showing love to someone who is your enemy.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it's so easy to look around sometimes and think we have enemies, and that's such a beautiful story. Such a beautiful story, because it really shows love.
Right.
And even that is also in the scriptures, right? Love thy enemies.
And well, I mean, and that just goes to show whenever there's somebody who is suffering, it might be a good idea to think, are they a refugee from something? Even if it is from their own pain.
Ooh. Isn't that so true? Kat, would you be okay if we just sat here for the last minute or so and had a moment of silence for everyone that's suffering before we close out the show?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's do that. Well, everyone, we just want to thank you for listening and watching, for participating if you participate, and let's go out and share this beautiful love with the world. As you know, there's also a Relatively Damaged podcast where I interview amazing guests who've overcome some sort of struggle in their lives and how they found hope and healing, because it is possible. So you can find the podcast if you need a little extra strength on Spotify, Apple, and many more. And Kat and I are on social media, so if you just need to get pointed in the right direction, just let us know. Absolutely. We're sending our hearts out to you. Any last words, Kat?
No, not today.
Okay, you guys. We'll see you next week.